When your healthcare provider takes a biopsy, how do they arrive at a diagnosis? It may be surprising to discover that it is usually not your healthcare provider diagnosing your specimen, but in fact a team of pathologists. Pathologists are critical members of the healthcare team that work behind the scenes to make sure you are getting accurate results to achieve effective treatment. The diagnostic process begins with your healthcare provider removing a tissue sample. The biopsy is then placed into a bottle that contains a liquid preservative-like formula. A KWV courier then picks up the bottle from your doctor's office and delivers it to the lab, where the courier personally hands the specimen to a technician who documents its arrival and confirms the specimen is labeled properly. The technician enters the patient information into our system, which assigns the specimen a unique identification number. Grossing is the first step in the process of transforming a specimen from a tissue sample to a glass slide a pathologist can examine under the microscope. In grossing, a highly trained pathologist assistant examines and describes the specimen. They document the measurements and describe the features of the tissue, and then cut the tissue into thin slices using a scalpel. After inspection, strategic samples are selected for examination. The sample is placed into a cassette labeled with a barcode and ID number specific to your biopsy. The cassettes are then placed into a fluid transfer instrument that processes the tissue specimen. The instrument dehydrates the specimen with alcohol, which replaces the water currently held within the cells. The alcohol is removed by xylene and replaced with paraffin wax. The cassettes are then sent to the embedding station. Here, a histotechnologist removes the processed tissue from its cassette and places it into a metal mold filled with molten paraffin wax. The top of the cassette is placed into the mold, and the block is moved over to a cooling plate that allows the wax to harden. Now that the specimen is embedded in a solid block of wax, it can be cut precisely by the histologist using an instrument called a microtome. The microtome allows the embedded tissue to be cut into extremely thin sections. Each section is carefully picked up by the histologist and floated onto a heated water bath. These tissue sections are then mounted onto a clear glass slide. Mounted slides are then stained with various reagents and dyes that stain tissue structures and cells so that they can be identified under a microscope. Once the glass slides are stained, the pathologist will look at the slide under a microscope and determine the diagnosis. The pathologist may decide to order additional stains to aid them in their diagnosis. Special stains help determine whether specific organisms or structural elements are present. Immunohistochemistry, or IHC stains, can be ordered to assist in diagnosing cancers and other tumors. Once a pathologist has come to their diagnosis, they will dictate a report which is then transcribed into the final report format. This whole process can take from less than 24 hours up to a few days. The patient's healthcare provider will discuss their diagnosis with the patient after receiving the final report, and will talk with them about the next steps needed for treatment.